I love people that crash and burn. I really enjoy that.
For decades, Jerry Seinfeld has redefined clean comedy, sharpened it, stripped it down, and defended it like a fortress. But behind the punchlines and Porsche drives, there's another rhythm: the people who don't make him laugh. Not every comedian gets a handshake, not every comic gets his respect, and some get the full Seinfeld freeze. He doesn't trade in outbursts, he trades in erasure. Larry David, Chris Rock, Steve Martin. He's shared stages with the sharpest minds in stand-up, but when someone doesn't belong in that circle, Seinfeld doesn't fake it. He subtracts.
Was 90 seconds, Peter. Well, I mean, how much can I... What am I going to jam in here?
If you let me finish.
And when he shades someone, no headlines, no hashtags, just a pause, and the sound of the door closing.
I don't like him. At all.
Oh, no.
At all. In fact, I have a particular feeling about him.
He's watched thousands take the mic, but only a few earned a second laugh, fewer earned his trust. The rest, either forgotten or remembered for the wrong reason. Here are the 5 comedians Jerry Seinfeld couldn't stand, and the shade wasn't silent, it was surgical. Number 1. Bobcat Goldthwait. Sometimes a feud isn't a clash, it's a slow burn that never cools down. When Jerry Seinfeld talks about people who bother him, he's usually diplomatic, precise, measured. But when the name Bobcat Goldthwait comes up, the tone shifts, the words sharpen, and the mask drops just enough. Their rivalry isn't just about comedy, it's about philosophy, about what comedy is supposed to be. Bobcat saw Jerry as corporate, buttoned up, too clean, too polite, too eager to please. Seinfeld, in contrast, saw Bobcat as chaotic, loud, disrespectful to the form, not dangerous in a smart way, just messy. He used to be a comedian, now he's just a bitter guy screaming into a mic. That wasn't said backstage, that wasn't whispered in private, that was live, on the Howard Stern show. Years after Bobcat had taken his shots, Seinfeld came back with sniper fire, calm, cruel, and rehearsed. And here's the kicker, he wasn't even prompted. Jerry brought Bobcat up unasked. He tore into him line by line, mocked the voice, dismissed the persona, questioned his talent. Not in rage, but in that cold, surgical tone Jerry reserves for people he really wants gone. You know the guy who talks like this all the time? That's not an act, that's just how he talks. He's got problems.
We've got it, you beat.
Yeah.
But they're going, no.
To me, this is a brilliant observation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Goldthwait, for his part, never played innocent. He'd fired the first shots years earlier, called Seinfeld a fraud, said his comedy was built on money and status, claimed he never took risks, never said anything real. It wasn't about punchlines, it was about identity. Seinfeld built his brand on control, rhythm, polish. Bobcat brought fire, freakouts, and total chaos to the stage. In Seinfeld's eyes, it wasn't raw, it was lazy. Bobcat broke rules, Jerry wrote them, and when Bobcat went after Jerry's relationship with a much younger woman in the late 90s, it wasn't just jokes anymore, it was personal. That's the moment it became permanent. Jerry doesn't go on public takedowns often, he rarely names names, so when he does, it means the offense went deeper than ego. It hit something more internal, something sacred. To Jerry, Bobcat represented everything he didn't want comedy to become: aimless rage, vulgarity over craft, volume over timing. And to Bobcat, Jerry was the king of an ivory tower, a guy with clean jokes and clean shoes, cashing checks while real comics bled on stage. There's no middle ground between them, and maybe that's the point. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a full-blown rejection of each other's core. No public reunion, no mellowed-out podcast episode years later. Just silence, and one very public, very deliberate burn. Because when Jerry really hates something, he immortalizes it. Number 2. Janine Garofalo. Some clashes are loud, others simmer in silence. With Janine Garofalo and Jerry Seinfeld, it was always tension in the margins, no shouting, no headlines, just quiet disdain. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes, jabs wrapped in sarcasm. And at the heart of it, Two wildly different definitions of comedy. Janine Garofalo didn't just dislike Seinfeld, she said it outright. Called it privileged, shallow. A show about nothing, made by people with everything. And Jerry? He noticed. He didn't respond at first. Didn't need to. But in interviews years later, you can feel the frost in how he refers to her. Or more accurately, how he doesn't. Some people think if they're angry enough, it counts as funny. They never worked together, never even tried. Their circles in the 1990s comedy overlapped constantly, yet never connected. Janine built her identity on being anti-establishment, political, introspective, messy in a way that made fans feel seen. But Jerry? He built walls, crafted every beat. He didn't want the audience to feel his pain. He wanted them to marvel at the architecture of the joke. That wasn't just a style difference. It was a full rejection of each other's worldview. And when Janine said shows like Seinfeld were laugh tracks for people who fear honesty, that was it. I don't do bitterness, I do punchlines. Seinfeld was never going to engage in a feud, but he didn't have to. His avoidance was louder than an insult. You won't find him praising her. You won't find her in Comedians in Cars. You won't find a single clip of them together. Because Jerry doesn't attack with volume. He attacks with absence.
Don't just work out these. You gotta work this muscle out too. Read a book every once in a while because it might give you some information that you might need.
There's a story from a New York comedy panel in the early 2000s. Janine was on stage talking about how certain comedians defend the system because the system defends them. Someone in the back, allegedly Jerry, stood up and left the room mid-sentence. No words, just a message. She once described him as a technician with no soul. He never replied, but years later, when asked about why certain comics don't make it into his world, he said, "Some people confuse confession with comedy. If you're just bleeding on stage, that's therapy, not a set." That wasn't a general statement, that was a laser. To Seinfeld, comedy is a craft, not a diary entry. And Garofalo's raw, personal political rants felt undisciplined. To him, honesty without structure is just noise. And to her, structure without vulnerability is just empty polish. There was never going to be a middle ground, only a line neither one would cross. In the end, they weren't enemies. They were just irreconcilable. He built the room, she broke the door, and neither one looked back. Number 3. Jay Mohr. Some beefs are public. This one was practically edited out of existence. Jay Mohr isn't a household name like Seinfeld, but for a few years in the 90s he was everywhere. Stand-up, movies, Saturday Night Live. Fast-talking, ambitious, and hungry for spotlight. Too hungry maybe. And Jerry Seinfeld. He spotted it instantly. They were never friends, not really. But their paths crossed often. Comedy clubs, guest appearances, TV tapings. And according to insiders, Jerry didn't just keep his distance, he flagged him. Why? Because Jerry doesn't respect thirst, he respects timing. Jay, in Jerry's world, moved too loud, too fast, and worst of all, he talked. Mohr made a habit of dropping names in interviews, criticizing comedy legends, hinting at rivalries, and painting himself as an insider too early. If you're telling war stories and you never went to war, people notice. He once joked on a podcast that Seinfeld was just a show about neurotic people who need therapy, and that real comics knew it wasn't dangerous. It didn't take long for the blacklist to kick in. Jay was never invited on Comedians in Cars, never referenced, never tapped for anything Jerry adjacent. And when asked why, Seinfeld gave the classic non-answer. Some people are funny, some people are funny once. There was a particularly awkward moment backstage at a New York benefit show. Jay tried to start a conversation with Seinfeld, just small talk. According to a witness, Jerry smiled, nodded, and walked away mid-sentence. Brutal, quiet, intentional. Because for Seinfeld, the worst sin isn't being unfunny, it's being fake. And he felt Jay wasn't just putting on a persona, he was trying to speedrun credibility. Seinfeld once said, "Comedy's a marathon. Some people want the finish line without the race."
Seinfeld can do he can really talk about anything, and people, just because it's Seinfeld and they paid $100 a ticket, will be like, "That's so funny."
Mohr didn't help his case. He made the rounds telling tales of comedians who weren't as friendly as they seem. He never used Jerry's name, but everyone knew who he meant. The irony. Moore is a solid mimic, a sharp writer, but in Seinfeld's universe, that's not enough. Mimicry without identity is just noise. And Jerry never saw Jay as someone with his own voice, just someone echoing louder voices, hoping no one would notice. There's no famous fallout, no screaming match, just a long, deliberate freeze. The kind where you don't get uninvited, you just never hear from them again. Jay Moore didn't get kicked out of Seinfeld's world, he just never got in. And in Jerry's universe, that's the same thing. Number 4. Michael Richards. This one hurts. Because unlike the others, Jerry didn't start out disliking Michael Richards. He loved him. Richards was Kramer, the lightning bolt inside Seinfeld, the human explosion with perfect hair and absurd timing. Jerry once called him the funniest physical performer since Chaplin. But then came the night in 2006 that rewrote everything. A stand-up set at the Laugh Factory, a heckler, a meltdown, and then, the moment no one could unsee, a racist tirade caught on camera. Angry, raw, repeated. It spread fast, and silence hit faster. It broke my heart. Seinfeld didn't defend him, but he didn't erase him either. What he did was more precise. He stepped between Richards and the public. He booked a spot on Letterman, where Richards could issue an apology. It was awkward, haunted. Jerry watched from the guest chair as the crowd nervously laughed, until he turned to them and said, "Stop laughing. This isn't funny." That moment was real, but it was also final.
It may have happened. You know, I'm a performer. I push the envelope. I work in a very uncontrolled manner on stage.
After that, something changed. Richards disappeared from public life. And Jerry, for all his control, never invited him back into the fold. Not really. He wasn't part of Comedians in Cars. He wasn't highlighted in retrospectives. No reunion specials. No podcast episodes. No cameos. Just a quiet retreat. In later interviews, Seinfeld's tone around Richards got clinical. Not bitter, cold. He talked about the incident as unfortunate, uncharacteristic, but never redeemable. You could hear it. The trust was gone. Because for Seinfeld, comedy is a discipline. You can be weird, you can be extreme, but you cannot lose the room, especially not like that. When you go on stage, you take on a responsibility. You don't get to fall apart in front of people. Jerry's comedy isn't built on rage, it's built on distance, irony, poise. And what Michael did on that stage broke every rule Jerry holds sacred. Did Jerry hate Richards afterward? Probably not in the emotional sense, but professionally, he cut the cord. He said as much without saying it. The art and the artist aren't always separable, especially when the artist detonates in public. Michael Richards wasn't pushed out of Jerry's world. He walked out, and the door didn't close loudly, it just never opened again. Number 5, Roseanne Barr. There's bold, and then there's just loud. And for Jerry Seinfeld, that line is razor thin, and Roseanne crossed it every time. They were two of the biggest sitcom names of the 90s, but if you think that meant mutual respect, think again. Seinfeld never worked with Roseanne, never appeared on her show, and never spoke of her with warmth. Not once. When asked about her in interviews, he'd smirk, pause, shrug, that tight-lipped Seinfeld pause that says more than a paragraph. Because to him, Roseanne wasn't edgy, she was messy. She tore up the rules, but not to elevate comedy, to tear everything down. There's a difference between comedy and chaos. One makes people laugh, the other makes people leave. Roseanne, meanwhile, was never subtle about her feelings. She said shows like Seinfeld weren't real and described his brand of humor as safe New York rich guy jokes. And Jerry? He took the hit, filed it. And years later, when Roseanne's career imploded in scandal and self-destruction, he didn't gloat. He just nodded, like he saw it coming.
With that single inflammatory tweet, Roseanne's rising star imploded today.
In 2018, when her reboot was cancelled after her tweet storm, Jerry made a dry, brutal comment. "I don't think she should have been fired. I think she should have been recast." That wasn't sympathy. that was the knife, twisted just enough. The truth? Seinfeld didn't see Roseanne as a comic first. He saw her as unpredictable, hostile, not part of the craft, just part of the noise. He's said many times that the comedians he loves most are precise, builders, architects of laughter. Roseanne wasn't that. She was a sledgehammer. And in Jerry's universe, you don't bring a sledgehammer into the writer's room. Comedy is timing. What you don't say is just as important as what you do. Roseanne always said what was on her mind. Every unfiltered thought, every angry opinion, every inside fight dragged into the light. To her, that was honesty. To Seinfeld, it was sabotage. He's never directly trashed her in long form, but his avoidance has been absolute. She never appeared in Comedians in Cars. She's not in his Netflix stand-up retrospectives. Her name is barely spoken in the same sentence. And that's the Seinfeld signature, erasure over explosion. Roseanne may have broken records, but Jerry never gave her a seat at the table. Not because she wasn't famous, but because she wasn't disciplined. In Seinfeld's world, comedy is a scalpel. Roseanne brought a grenade, and that's a door that never opens twice. He never yelled, he never cancelled, he just turned and walked. For Seinfeld, comedy isn't war, it's design. And when someone breaks the blueprint, there's no second draft. Bobcat, Garofalo, Moore, Richards, Roseanne. Different voices, same verdict. They didn't just miss the mark, they missed his. Like, subscribe, and if you want to catch these breakdowns before anyone else, consider becoming a member. Because in Seinfeld's world, if it doesn't land, it doesn't exist.